Today we got a good video, the best starting five if every player on the team was in their prime. I wanted to do this with current day players, but it turns out most teams besides the Lakers all have young players that have either yet to hit their primes or players currently in theirs, so we had to go over to all-time players. But that's alright because it turned out even better with the amount of insane teams that I found. So just to be clear, we're looking at rosters on teams throughout NBA history and finding the starting fives that would have been best if every player on that roster in that year was in their prime. We're also looking at teams after the 2000s, so keep that in mind. Number 1, we got the 2009 Phoenix Suns with Steve Nash, Jason Richardson, Grant Hill, Amari Stoudemire, and Shaq. Originally, the 2007 Suns were the best team of that era. They had a 60-win season and almost beat out the Spurs to most likely make it to the NBA Finals that year. But by 2009, 2 years later, they had veterans like Jason Richardson, Grant Hill, and Shaq join the team. Like I said though, they were veterans and well past their prime. So originally that team wasn't great, but if they were in their primes, Steve Nash and Amari were already an all-time great duo, but then on top of that they would add Jason Richardson, who was a 20-point per game guy, Grant Hill, who was a multiple-time all-star and put up 25, 5, and 5 in his best season before his injuries, and Shaq, who we know is arguably the greatest center of all time. So with a team like this, there's no arguing how unstoppable they'd be. Not even to mention, just thinking of how good Nash and Shaq would be together in their primes would be insane, because it would give them one of the best shooting and passing guards of all time to run pick and rolls with Shaq all day long. Just alone right there, they would be one of the best duos ever. Number 2, the Oklahoma City Thunder with Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Kevin Durant, Serge Ibaka, and Kendrick Perkins. The team that's always talked about as the biggest missed opportunity ever, because OKC could have kept them together and had 3 league MVPs all on one team. If they did stay together, they wouldn't have all been able to develop into being as good as they have gotten today, but let's assume they would have. And for this scenario, assume they all would have reached their full primes on one team. Now, the point of this video isn't to decide whether these lineups would have worked out or not, even though I don't think this one would today, but that's besides the point. The point is to look at these teams and how good they'd be, assuming that everything did work out. So in the front court, Kendrick Perkins is pretty irrelevant, but I would easily say that Serge Ibaka's prime years have definitely been these last few on the Raptors, and now as a stretch four that can defend, that's the perfect complement to playing with 3 former league MVPs. And in a world where this trio does work all in their primes, Westbrook stops caring about scoring, averages maybe 15 a game with the near triple-double, and does all the small things for the team, while James Harden and Kevin Durant really do the majority of the entire team scoring every single night. And that part of it would definitely work because KD never has an off night, so when things aren't falling for James, Durant will be there to more than make up for it. Number 3, the Warriors with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, Draymond Green, and DeMarcus Cousins. This team is probably the closest we've gotten to actually seeing them all play in their primes, but even then we were still very far off from it. We saw these guys all play together in 2019, and by that point Steph and KD weren't really close to their MVP forms due to having to play with each other. Draymond Green really fell off, and DeMarcus Cousins was obviously coming off of that ruptured Achilles. But imagine if we took one of, if not the greatest MVP season of all time, and put that Steph along with Klay Thompson's 2019 season, with Kevin Durant's MVP year where he averaged 32 a game, and Draymond Green's 2017 where he won the Defensive Player of the Year, all wrapped together with DeMarcus Cousins in his prime where he averaged 27, 11, and 4 in 2017 for the Kings. Man, I mean, Cousins was shooting 6 threes a game that year, so he would have actually been a dominant big man down low and still fit in with the Splash Brothers and the Warriors type of play. The scoring, the floor spacing, the blend of offense and defense would have all just been off the charts and the best combination of it that we've ever seen, which in my mind definitely makes this maybe the best starting five of the video, because the lineup's missing nothing and they would have all worked great together. Number 4, the Nets with Darren Williams, Joe Johnson, Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Brook Lopez. This is the one and only time, the only video where the 2013 Brooklyn Nets will ever get talked about in a positive light, because we know originally they were trash, and at the time none of these guys were in their primes. Well, aside from maybe Brook Lopez, but one could even argue that he's been more effective in terms of team wins while on the Bucks than he ever was on the Nets, but we'll get there. So like I said, this team was bad, but in this alternate universe, if the 2010 Utah Jazz Darren Williams teamed up with the 2010 Atlanta Hawks Joe Johnson, who wasn't putting up his best numbers that year but definitely was playing his personal best, and combined them with a prime Paul Pierce, MVP Kevin Garnett, and probably Brooklyn Nets Brook Lopez, they'd finally have a great team. I mean, considering that they'd all be in their primes, this still isn't the flashiest team, but no doubt they definitely won some championships. I don't know though, it sounds great on paper, but I still just can't get too excited about this one. I guess I'll just always be clouded with all those terrible memories of seeing these guys together. Number 5, the Celtics with Rajon Rondo, Ray Allen, Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Shaq. And number 5 is better because, as you may remember, Shaq did play for the Boston Celtics for 1 year in 2011, while Boston's Big Four still played there. So that means that we would have these 5 all in their primes. Rondo's prime was on the Celtics when he was competing to really be the best point guard in the NBA, racking up what we thought at the time was a lot of triple doubles. Ray Allen's best personal season was on the Supersonics when he put up over 26 a game. Paul Pierce's prime was on the Celtics, KG's was in his MVP year, and Shaq's was obviously in his Lakers days. I mean, just in general, without them even being in their primes, keep in mind, their best center that they ever played with was Kendrick Perkins, and now we get to replace him with prime Shaq, as well as have the rest of them be dramatically better players. It'd be over. And adding Shaq doesn't create any problems either. Rondo's more than willing to pass rather than score. Ray Allen's always been okay with being one of, if not the best spot-up shooters of all time. Paul Pierce would be the ball handler and main second scorer, in this case in the Kobe Bryant role, while KG would do a little of everything. Plus, he can shoot from the perimeter to get out of Shaq's way. Then, of course, Shaq would be Shaq. Number 6, the Spurs with Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Kawhi Leonard, Tracy McGrady, and Tim Duncan. And for this one, we have a pretty underrated one that you might not have thought about, and probably for a good reason. Because remember that in 2013, Tracy McGrady did play on the San Antonio Spurs, even though he didn't play a single regular season game for them, and only played 6 games in the postseason, and didn't score a single point. But hey, he was still on the roster and would go together with these 4 who already won a championship just by themselves. But this time we'd get to include him, and all of these guys would be in their primes. We did get to see how dominant Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, and Tim were all in their primes together because they won multiple championships, while Kawhi's in his prime right now, so we'd insert this version of him and prime T-Mac to go with them, and basically they'd be unstoppable. Because to already one of, if not the best big 3 of all time, we're adding one of the all-time greatest scorers in T-Mac and one of the all-time greatest two-way players in Kawhi Leonard, who also averages 25 plus points a game. So they cover both grounds of offense and defense, and adding them doesn't add any additional problems, which means they'd just be that much better. Number 7, we have the Cavs, and this one's exciting because let's not forget who was on the Cavs roster in 2008. We had Derrick Rose, who really didn't do much at the time originally, but in this case he'd be in his MVP form. Also, don't forget they had Dwayne Wade for about 40 games, so he'd be in his 2006 championship form. There was LeBron, Kevin Love, who'd be that dominant 26 and 15 guy that we all miss from his Timberwolves days, and then Tristan Thompson. But okay, right off the bat, the downside here is 3-point shooting. The only great outside shooter in this 5 is Kevin Love, so that would be the downside. But I'm sure they'd all be great enough to make up for it. Wade and James dominated while they were together, and while they were, neither man was in their primes, so just imagine how good they would be if they were both in theirs when they were a duo, but then combine that with the rest of these 3 guys playing at their best. I mean, James, Wade, and Rose are all unselfish enough to make it work, and Kevin Love would dominate the boards and could average at least 20 a night off wide open threes, so there's no doubt this would be one of the greatest lineups ever. Then for number 8, we don't just have one lineup because we couldn't. There was too many to choose from for the Lakers, so we're going to quickly go through all of them. For the first, let's not forget about the 2004 Lakers, where, very old in basketball terms, Gary Payton and Karl Malone joined Kobe Bryant and Shaq. Originally, the team ended up not being very good, and it broke their three-peat streak, but if they were all in their primes, then we'd have Gary Payton from the Sonics, who is one of the best defenders ever, probably 2006 Kobe, who averaged 35 a game, Rick Fox, who isn't exciting, then Karl Malone and Shaq, who really just speak for themselves. And this one's interesting because we basically know how good Kobe and Shaq were together in their primes. Gary Payton would work well with them, but we'd actually get to see how good Karl Malone was without John Stockton. And that's one of the lineups. The next one though, of course, is the 2013 Lakers, where their 5 was this: Steve Nash, Kobe Bryant, Ron Artest, Pau Gasol, and Dwight Howard. And obviously, as we did see in 2013, none of these guys were in their primes while they were on the same team. Respectively, for the most part, they were all still very good players, but past their primes and facing injuries. Had that not have been the case though, and they were all still in their primes, they'd be nearly impossible to beat, because we're talking about the former MVP Steve Nash, Pete Kobe, the Pacers Ron Artest, who, keep in mind, was a 20-point per game defensive player of the year, Pau Gasol, and prime Orlando Magic Dwight Howard. So Kobe's the leader of the team, obviously. Steve Nash and Dwight Howard would make an insane duo. I mean, imagine Nash and Amari, but twice as good. Artest as the defensive stopper, and Gasol as the fourth or even fifth option in all this. So this one makes for a very satisfying 5. Then for the last Lakers lineup, we honestly have to look towards today's Lakers. Prime Celtics Rajon Rondo, Spurs playoff Danny Green, prime LeBron, prime Anthony Davis, and again, prime Dwight Howard. So it's this year's Lakers, who are already contending for a championship, but adding in 2 more superstar players. And we can only imagine how good that would be. Let's hear your guys' favorite 5 though. Comment them down below and let me know, and comment any video ideas you might want to see in the future. Drop a like if you enjoyed, subscribe with notifications on, and I'll catch you next video.